God, I look to you. God, I look to you, and I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom to know just what to do. Sing that one more time. God, I look to you. God, I look to you, and I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom to know just what to do. And I will love you, Lord, my strength. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my God. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. God, I look to you. God, I look to you, and I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom to know just what to do. And I will love you, Lord, my strength. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my God. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. And I will love you. I will love you, Lord, my strength. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my God. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. Hallelujah, our God reigns. Hallelujah, our God reigns. Hallelujah, our God reigns. Forever all my days. Hallelujah.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Good to see you guys today. I think it was really good to see you guys on Wednesday as well. Thanks for coming out to send off Ryan. It was good to see some of you guys on Friday. I hope you guys had a great weekend. It's my turn to give you guys a message. And before we begin, I just kind of want to give you guys just a Bible verse to just be kind of reminded of and just to start with. And it's one we've heard a lot, but it comes from Matthew 28, verse 11, and it reads, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I, the Lord, will give you rest. Um, I was sharing with Esther and maybe a couple of teachers. I was, I started working on this message for you guys, and uh, like I wrote like multiple drafts, and I just kept trying to simplify it, right? And I came to this conclusion because I kept like trying to give this message where I was like, and then I thought about it. I'm like, yo, I'm not even a pastor. I don't have seminary school training. I'm like, what are you doing, right? Just keep it simple. And so, for me, I just kind of want to share with you guys the kind of the ups and the downs that I've been having. Just battles of like patience and endurance, and just the last few months that we've been in quarantine. This is my first message since I think February, right, which is right before everything kind of happened. So the last message I gave, it was kind of about the pursuit of God and loving that journey of getting to know God, and as you're doing these things, having a eternal mindset. And so, about a week and a half ago, is kind of when I started thinking about what I wanted to share, and um, what really kind of got myself to kind of just examine what was kind of going through my head and my heart was I've been reading this Tim Keller devotional book in the mornings, and the topic for that day, it was speaking about gluttony, right? And you know my first thought was, okay, gluttony, like what can it really tell me? Like the word that when we think about that word, it's just overeating, right? And so this is actually what Tim Keller wrote, and so I'm just going to read a just short portion of it. And he writes, today this word means only overeating, but traditionally it meant the inability to live a life of delayed gratification. Gluttony may lead to literal addictions to food, drinking, or drugs, to gulping them down. But even if it does not, the spirit of gluttony is always to take the easy way out. And then he continues, the great mistake of gluttony is to seek happiness directly rather than as a byproduct of living responsibly. And then he ends the chapter with give examples of how the sacrifice of immediate pleasure leads to greater satisfaction and happiness. So when I first read this, my first reaction was, oh, okay. So I started thinking about my past couple months, and I was like, oh, hey, Steve, you've been doing pretty well. You've been doing pretty good during this quarantine time, listening to your spiritual leaders, right? Doing the recommended reading by pastor, your journaling, your Bible writing. For yourself, you're exercising when you come home. You're delaying quote unquote pleasure when it comes to like eating out and things like that. You're only like limiting yourself to the weekends. You're trying to eat healthy, and just all these things, right? That I can kind of see tangibly, and for the most part, I had more pluses than minuses, at least in my mind, right, when I first started. And so, when we first started this quarantine back in March, right, that message that I gave you guys just about like this like relentless drive and pursuit of trying to get to know God, it was very much fresh in my mind. And, when it started, yeah, it was a bummer. I think we all can agree to that. But for me, I was kind of excited to prove to myself, right? Like, okay, you're gonna be able to get through this time because, well, first you just gave this message, so now it's time to put it into practice. And I decided like, hey, like I'm gonna endure and I'm gonna discipline my way through this quarantine. I don't care how long it's gonna take, but you won't fall, right? You're gonna stay steady and you're just gonna make it through, right? That was kind of my attitude. And especially to start, right? I decided, hey, like, okay, you're spending time with God. You're gonna read and you're gonna learn. And for me, especially that first month, I was really just enjoying that time of what I was kind of starting to understand was, when people say rest in God, that's what I was kind of learning about. And I think what helped me was that, in all honesty, like all the things that we have enjoyed, they've been kind of taken away, right? And so I had nowhere to go. And for me, I was like, okay, let's really use this time to just sit and be still with God and just kind of learn and see what He has in store for me. And during that first month of quarantine, I would say it was probably the closest I had felt to God in a really long time, just in terms of the level of intimacy and just really enjoying getting to know more about Him. And before we went into this quarantine, and just in general, when I go through, in terms of like difficult training, whether it's mental, spiritual, physical, a quote that I've just kind of always been reminded of. I've seen it in passing so many times, but it's one by Muhammad Ali, famous boxer. And a quote that he says is, I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion, right? That's just something that kind of comes to my mind when it comes to like enduring through tough challenges. And so as I was thinking, I was like, okay, let me take a look at Jesus, right? And when I look at him, his whole life was an example of denying himself, of the now, of like his present day, and waiting for that glory to come later. The images that always come to my mind as I was kind of thinking about this is, he's coming down from a mountain, right, after prayer, after a long day of preaching, healing, and when he gets to that bottom of the mountain, more people are waiting for him, right? And instead of turning them away, he continues to do the will of God. Despite me looking out on the outside, I'm like, hey, like, this guy's pretty tired. And you would think he'd want some rest, right? But that's not what he came here for. And so, suffering now, glory later, that was kind of the pattern of his life. And, in Luke 24:26, he actually writes, was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And so, going back to me, I began to think like, okay, why did all of a sudden, especially in the last month, like why did all of a sudden this joy that I began to experience in the beginning of quarantine, right? All of a sudden, like in the last month, I caught myself. I was like, oh, why is it such a fight? And like every single day to get to the end of each day. Every day, like in the beginning, I was looking forward, like, so I had work, right? I'm still working outside, and but I was looking forward to that second half of my day, just looking forward to spending time with God. And but then all of a sudden, a couple weeks down the line, it turned into this feeling of having to like fulfill my duty of getting my fill of God, and then proceeding to the rest of my day. And that rest of the day was starting to look like turning off my brain, watching movies, and kind of just basically doing the things I want to do, right? And and so this is the kind of the conclusion I came to as I was kind of just writing this down, just kind of really seeing what was going on, and just kind of seeing what happened. In the beginning, I had set out my mind to pursue, this relationship with God during this time, right? I didn't want to waste this time. And so I had the intention and the heart of getting to know him through his word, through just the readings that, our leaders have recommended us, because, they felt like this is a good way to spend this time, right? And the reason why I know like I was close to God and like I was really enjoying this time was like I would I'm like a big like movie watcher. I know a lot of like pop culture references, so I would read chapters in the Bible, and then I would go to Esther, and just so I could remember what I was reading, I would reiterate it back to her in like pop culture form. So I remember reading like that portion about Elijah, right? And he's like, there's a portion where it's like him versus the people who worship Baal, and like there's a point where these people are praying to their God and they can't, and they're like basically asking to bring down fire and set this I forgot what it was, but set I think the lamb or something on fire, and but they couldn't. And then Elijah, he like calls them out. He's basically like flexing on them and saying like, oh, is this all you guys have? And then he rains down fire. And I was just having a good time. Just reading the word and spending that time with God. And for me, I wasn't really thinking about all the things I might be missing out on, right? And in all honesty, like when people say like God is their the thing that fulfills them, I was thinking I was starting to begin to understand what that was like. And as everybody was kind of enjoying themselves and whatnot, like I was just really singularly focused. Like I would find myself at the end of the day, maybe 20, 30 minutes, and then I was tired. I would just go to sleep, but I felt full. And but as time went by, I began to look around, and I began to uh, ask my friends like, hey, what are you guys doing to spend your time? And just other people around me, and they said they were not productive, watching movies, YouTube, all these things that are like very enjoyable and comfortable to the flesh. And uh, I started thinking to myself, I began to look around. I started thinking to myself, like, hey, Steve, why are you busting your butt so hard, right? Give yourself a break. And that's when I began to give into a lot of leniency, or gave a lot of leniency to my comforts and rest. And so I'm going to share with you guys, right? Like, so, I mentioned I'm a big movie watcher, and the what I was reminded of was that obsession, right? Julius, he talked about it maybe a couple weeks ago, right? He was about his shoes. Remember, he would go through buying up shoes and then selling them, and then he ended up with like $150 profit or something crazy like that, right? So I counted for you guys because I wanted to show you how real what I was doing. In the last 3 months, I counted it because I've been keeping track of what I've been watching. I've watched 66 movies. And so that's about 22 movies a month. And just like, I was just really set on like, this was kind of like a personal project task of mine, right? Like I was gonna, I wanted to just watch all these old movies that I missed and, that I've heard about. And so I just kind of really took into that during this quarantine time, right? And so, in the beginning, as I was not trying to give into my comforts, and then eventually it did, what happened was God all of a sudden became a task that I had to do in order to not feel guilty about spending the time that was always kind of underlying in my heart. And it's basically, I used God to not feel guilty about spending the time that I actually really want to spend my time, which is in doing what I want to do, right? And the things that are comfortable. And so, like I mentioned, right, I was writing multiple drafts, just kind of trying to simplify this thing. And, I thought this message was just going to be about, the first thing I thought about after I read that devotional was, I thought it was going to be about delaying gratification, right? I thought it was going to be something where I could encourage you guys, like, hey, like, look at me, right? I've tried to do this good. I've done this good job because I've done all these quote unquote good things for myself. And then, but what it turns out was, because I did these good things, I felt like I had the right to be lazy and enjoy the comforts of this quarantine. And so, like, basically, I did the work, right? I did the work of getting to know God, or so I thought. And now I had this right to do what I want to do. And, what I found out is, obviously I wasn't delaying anything, right? And so I actually looked it up. I looked up the exact definition of delayed gratification according to Wikipedia, and I wanted to see what they had to say. And the definition they give is, it describes the process that the subject undergoes when the subject resists the temptation of an immediate reward in preference for a later reward. And so I started filling in the gap. I started filling in the word reward with God, and substituting with like movies and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, like, was what I'm doing actually delayed gratification? Turns out, according to this definition, especially in the last few weeks, I did not see God as my reward, right? He actually God turned into the thing that I considered in the way of my reward, and the reward that I held on to was my comfort. And when I realized that about myself, I was like, oh, that's a pretty good gut check, because I think I've been actually living like that for a while. I feel like, us getting to know God, and a lot of it, or at least for me, it was something that I felt like I had to do rather than something I wanted to do. And I think I've spent a lot of my life and my Christian walk doing that. And so God doesn't become the reward. He gets lost in the process of just trying to satisfy some comfort in me, knowing that I think I'm getting to know God, right? And so God stopped being the goal. The goal was to get to the comforts. And so even if I was spending time with God, I was rushing through it. I could feel myself rushing through it, especially in the last couple weeks. And as I began preparing this message and reflecting, I just had to go back to the basics, right? I had to reset, and there were several things that I was just kind of reminded of, and I just wanted to share with you guys. It's simple. We hear it all the time. But, just in terms of this Christian walk that a lot of us have embarked on, it's an endurance race, not a sprint. Um, I think for me, I felt like I could do this on my own with my own strength and will. But I need Jesus by my side. I need to endure. I need to press on. And I really need to fight myself, like in terms of not immediately grabbing at the easy things in front of me that are very easily accessible. Each and every day, it's a battle, right? And when I can remember, I try to tell myself, "Hey, Steve, like let's make the hard choice, right?" And I don't obviously I don't succeed at that every time, but what I have learned is when I make the hard choice for myself, is that there is usually joy at the end of that decision. And I remind myself, and I remind you guys, we're gonna fail over and over again in this life, right? We're sinful by nature, and I think a lot of us can get into this rut. And what I guess I would encourage you guys, it's gonna be okay. I remind myself that this is a long journey, and whatever it takes, like I got to get back up. I got to keep going, and I'm gonna pick myself back up. And I can't do it on my own strength, but to give my heart to God, acknowledge what I'm going through, and as I spend that time with God, like even as I fail, I know that if I keep giving Him my heart, acknowledge what I'm going through, and just let Him know, like, hey, God, I'm struggling, and I need you. I need you, and I want you. Um, there are a lot of things in this world um, that we try and we're going to fail. But God promises us multiple times in the Bible, when we seek Him earnestly with all of our hearts, we're going to get to know Him, even if it's slowly, but it's surely. And, to encourage myself, to encourage all of you guys, multiple times again in the Bible, Jesus calls us to endure and suffer now for the sake of the joy later that He promises all throughout His Word. And, actually, our small group, we read this chapter together in Luke chapter 6, and it's Jesus actually speaking to His disciples about the hardships that they were currently enduring as they were following Him in that present time. And He writes, Luke chapter 6, verses 20 to 23, looking at His disciples, He said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. But rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that is how their ancestors treated their prophets." And, just to remind you guys, right, there's this joy that's to come, but God calls us to endure. Like I mentioned, I feel like this Christian walk is probably a lot harder than, when we decide to follow after Christ. It's harder than what maybe the world tells us. But I want to encourage you guys, don't quit. I always tell this one friend of mine, who's always struggling, right, if it's worth doing this walk. I tell him don't quit because, just keep going at it, because when you quit, that's when you get in trouble, right? When you just give up and you decide, like, hey, like I don't want to do it anymore. It's too hard. But I encourage him, I encourage you guys, whatever it takes, get back up and keep running back to Christ. And when you get tired, you can't seem to continue, remember that verse that I told you guys in the beginning of this message. And it's Matthew 28:11. Once again, come to me, come to Jesus, all you who are weary and burdened, and I, the Lord, will give you rest. Not the things of what this world can offer, but Christ Himself. And I just want to touch on this, right? Like all the things that I talked about, like they're not bad in themselves. It just becomes a problem, obviously, when we put them as priority over God. When they start to become the center over God, that's when they become an issue, and that's what I started to realize about myself. So, coming to this conclusion, and, as I was re-examining my heart and just kind of really having to reset with God, I just want to leave you guys with a couple verses that I've been kind of holding on to as I've been going through the last couple weeks. And so 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18, we do not lose heart, though our outer self is decaying, our inner man is being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And lastly, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 5 through 7. This is Apostle Paul writing to his disciple Timothy, right? And he's writing this letter because he knows his time on earth it's almost done, and so he encourages Timothy with these words. And I'm going to read you guys the easy version, the very direct and literal version. And Paul writes this: "But you yourself must continue to think seriously and clearly. Be patient and brave when troubles come. Continue to tell the good news about Christ to people. Do all the work that God has given you to do as a servant. As for me, it is nearly time for me to die. My death will be like a drink offering that they pour out to God. My life as God's servant will end. I have worked to serve Christ well. I have finished everything that God wanted me to do. Like a runner who has run to the end of the race, I've continued to believe God's true message." That verse 7, it's that famous verse. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith. And so, just to end this, I encourage you guys, right? Don't quit. I know it's hard right now, especially in this time. We can get very lax about like things that we should do. It's very, very easy to make the comfortable choice, especially right now when it seems very hopeless. We seem trapped. We can't go anywhere. But I encourage you guys, continue to press on. And this is something I have to remind myself, and I hope this can encourage you guys as well. God is the reward, right? He is the prize. All the things that I'm doing in terms of like reading and whatnot, like these are all things I choose to do because it's a means and a way to get to know God, right? Get to know the heart of God and build that relationship with God. And it's not something that I should ever feel like I'm forced to do, right? Because God doesn't want to force relationship on us. He gave us that right to choose. And so for me, I had to pray, and I pray now, right? As I'm still going through this, I want to pray that God is somebody that I want to get to know each and every day, and not the thing that I should feel I should pursue out of guilt or whatever other reason that I twist it and mess it up with, right? For me, and I hope for you guys, something I have to remind myself is He is the reward worth pursuing with everything I have, and no matter how hard it gets, I just encourage you guys to keep going. Just keep going. It's hard, but just remember the promises God has for you, and I promise you guys He won't fail you. So that's my message for the day, and yeah. So I guess I don't know if Levine or anybody has anything to say, but yeah, just I gave the teacher some discussion questions, and we can hop into discussion.
Thank you so much, Steve Teacher. The only thing is, next June, most likely not this upcoming weekend, but the following weekend, guys, we'll do our graduation. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, have a great discussion. You too, Meadow. Bye.